I arrived at Todd's birthday party right on time, dressed in a collared shirt, a decent pair of slacks, and holding a gift that seemed too small for the occasion because, let's face it, I was always the guy who did everything by the book, but never quite felt like part of the story. The moment I walked through the door, I could feel it. The party wasn't for me. It wasn't for anyone, really. It was Todd's show, as always. Todd, the golden boy, the one who could light up a room with a smile. I didn't expect much, but I also didn't expect to be shoved into the corner by the trash bags, right next to the cooler. I set my gift down on a table and tried to blend in, but blending in was what I did best. It's what I'd always done. Claire was already laughing it up with Todd, of course. They were reminiscing about old times while he regaled her with stories of his latest business venture. She hung on every word. Every word. George, my father-in-law, barely gave me a glance. Linda, my mother-in-law, nodded as she passed me, absorbed in a conversation with someone else. Todd had the whole room in the palm of his hand. His charm was effortless, like everything in his life. I smiled, not that anyone was looking, but I knew how to play my part. That was when Todd dropped the joke. "So Ryan," he said, voice loud enough to carry across the room, "you know, I've always admired your ability to fix things around the house, but I don't know if I'd call what you do important." The laughter rippled through the crowd. I chuckled, a tight, strained sound that barely escaped my throat. I felt the heat creep up my neck, and I had to force my smile to stay in place. It wasn't the first time he'd taken a jab at me like that. It probably wouldn't be the last. I looked around the room, the familiar sense of invisibility creeping in, the feeling I'd had for most of my life. I didn't even belong here, and I wasn't fooling myself anymore. This was Todd's world, and I was just a background character, always had been. I couldn't help but wonder, though, was this my destiny? Always stuck on the sidelines, never quite enough to be noticed, but always enough to do what needed to be done? Would I always be the guy who quietly went along with things, just to keep the peace? As I stood there, my eyes flicking from Todd's easy smile to the oblivious faces of the rest of the family, I couldn't help but wonder, was I invisible because I let it happen, or was it just the way things always were? I wasn't sure, but tonight something felt different. Tonight I felt the urge to make a change. I stood there, still next to the cooler, watching as Todd soaked up more attention from the family. His laughter filled the air, his words always landing perfectly. I used to envy how easy it came to him, but now it just made the weight of it all even more suffocating. My mind drifted back to when we were kids, when Todd was the star and I was the one in the background, always trying to keep up, but never quite able to break free from the shadow he cast. Mom always had a special glow in her eyes when she talked about Todd. Whether it was his grades or his accomplishments in sports, she was always so proud. Me? I was the quiet one, the one who did everything right but never made a scene. When I had my own achievements, they were brushed off, almost as if they didn't matter. George, my dad, never pushed me to be anything more than ordinary. He thought the conventional path was enough. Get a job, get married, have a family. That was his mantra. No one ever asked me what I wanted, what I could do. It was always just assumed I'd take the back seat while Todd got all the praise. I remembered standing at Todd's high school graduation, my parents cheering louder for him than they ever did for me. I wasn't even bitter then, just resigned. They handed Todd the keys to a brand new car, while I got a hand-me-down from a cousin who'd barely kept it running. They'd given it to me like it was supposed to be some kind of reward, but I saw it for what it was, a consolation prize. And when I graduated college, the same damn thing. Todd got a shiny new car, while I was handed a cheap secondhand jacket. No applause, no congratulations for the late nights and hard work. It felt like a slap in the face. I snapped back to the present. Todd was still holding court with his effortless charm, pulling the attention of everyone in the room. Meanwhile, I was still standing by the trash bags, watching. Claire was caught up in conversation with Todd's new business partner. Of course, her laughter joined the rest, her attention fully on him, like she always did. She was so busy making sure she was seen, involved, that I knew she barely even noticed me anymore. I tried to shake it off, told myself to be cool, but it was hard, like I was stuck in a loop, watching my own life happen in the background. The quiet sacrifices, the missed moments, they piled up over the years. But no one saw it. Not Claire, not George, not Linda, not anyone. I wanted to tell Claire about the deal I'd just closed, the one I'd been working on for months, quietly making things happen behind the scenes. But it felt pointless. She'd never get it, not when she was so caught up in Todd's world. I started to feel like I was living a second-hand life, like everything I did had been overlooked, even though it was all the work I put in that kept things running. And then I thought, what would it take for me to finally be seen? Would I have to scream to get their attention? Or was it just always going to be Todd's stage? As the evening wore on, I realized something. I'd been quietly building my own success, without any fanfare, without anyone even knowing. And yet, here I was, still on the sidelines, while Todd took credit for everything, his and mine. I glanced across the yard, and my eyes landed on a photo display. Todd's face smiled back at me from every angle. Award ceremonies, family trips, big moments. The kind of things people put on display when they want to be remembered as the hero of the story. I looked for any trace of myself in those photos. Maybe one from a family holiday or a birthday. Maybe something, anything. But no, not a single image. Not one moment from my life. Nothing that connected me to their shared history. Just Todd, always Todd. It hit me hard, like a punch in the stomach. I'd spent my whole life doing what was needed, fixing things, making sure everyone else's lives ran smoothly, but never once did anyone stop to think about the work I'd put in. I thought back to childhood, how often I'd done the grunt work, taking care of things around the house. When the kitchen sink leaked, it was me who fixed it. When Claire's car broke down, it was me who got it running again. When anything needed doing, I was there, always in the background, never asking for anything in return. But I never got credit for it. I didn't need it, I told myself. That's what family does, right? But as I stood there, looking at Todd's smiling face in every frame, I realized something. No one ever noticed the quiet sacrifices I'd made. Claire was always quick to praise Todd for anything. It didn't matter how many things I did to help her, whether it was picking up groceries or taking care of the house. She'd thank me, but I never got the kind of recognition Todd did. Every time she lit up when Todd told a story about his latest business deal or a new promotion, it was like a small cut to my chest. And there Todd was now, laughing with our family, oblivious to the fact that I was standing there, simmering with frustration. I hated the way it felt, how my entire existence had been about being the reliable one, the one who never needed attention, the one who quietly took care of everything. And yet, here I was, completely invisible. I was tired of it. Tired of being overlooked, tired of being the one who was always in the background. I had built something real, and nobody had ever noticed. That thought, as simple as it was, cut through the haze of resentment. I had built something they couldn't even imagine. My business, my success, had quietly grown over the years. They had no idea. They had no clue how much I'd accomplished. I wasn't just the guy who fixed things. I wasn't the invisible one. And tonight I was going to make them see it. I wasn't going to keep waiting for their validation. If they couldn't see me for who I really was, then it was time to show them. I wasn't going to let Todd or anyone else take my place in the story anymore. I had done the work and I deserved recognition. I would make sure they knew it, starting tonight. I needed a moment to breathe, so I quietly slipped away from the crowd, heading toward the drink table where I could hide for a second. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through some numbers, trying to ground myself. The digits on the screen helped keep me focused, but the tension in my chest was hard to ignore. A few weeks ago, I closed a big deal. It had been months in the making, countless hours of phone calls, meetings, and back and forth negotiations. But I never told anyone about it, not because I didn't want to share my success, but because I hated the idea of looking like I was boasting. I'd learned that being humble, quiet, was the way to go. It had worked for me so far, even if nobody seemed to notice. I stared at the deal details on my phone, going over them again. But then, in the background of the party, I caught snippets of a conversation that stopped me cold. Todd's voice. "Yeah, it was my idea really," he said. "I was the one who got that whole deal together. I saw the potential, made the calls, the rest just fell into place." Todd, taking credit for my deal. My blood ran hot. I was hearing him retell the story, painting himself as the mastermind behind something I'd worked my ass off for. I felt the sting in my chest, the sharp, bitter burn of betrayal. Todd had done this before. I knew that. He had a way of making things look like they were his idea, his doing. But this was different. I hadn't known he was taking credit for something I'd done, not until now. I stood there, trying to steady my breath. My hand gripped the edge of the table as I listened to him. I could almost picture his smirk, the way he relished the attention. The anger started to bubble up. How many times had I let this slide? How many times had I quietly stood by, doing all the work while Todd took the spotlight? I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to make a scene here, not yet. I wasn't going to confront him in front of everyone, not when I was still piecing this all together. But I wasn't about to let this go either. Todd had stolen credit for my work, again. And I was done being the quiet guy in the background. I wasn't going to let him keep taking what was mine. I pulled my phone from the table and stared at the details of the deal, the one Todd was bragging about. There were figures, documents, names, proof of my work. But the thing that clicked in my head wasn't just the personal betrayal. It was the bigger picture. This wasn't just about Todd taking credit in front of our family. This deal, this success, it wasn't just some small thing I could let slide. No, it was bigger, much bigger. The business I'd been building quietly on my own had turned into something substantial. This deal, my deal, was a game changer. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the people who'd been lying to themselves about my success, assuming I was just the guy who fixed things around the house. The ones who never saw me for who I really was, for what I'd actually accomplished. I wasn't going to let Todd's lies slide any longer. I had something that could change everything, and I was going to use it. I started to plan, quietly, carefully. This wasn't going to be a rush to make a scene. No, I was going to expose the truth on my terms, in my way. And when it happened, when everyone saw the truth, they wouldn't just be surprised. They'd understand that I wasn't the invisible one. I was the one who had built something real, something that could make a difference in ways they never imagined. I wasn't just fixing things around the house anymore. It was time for them to see me for who I really was. The party had shifted into full swing again. The noise of laughter and chatter filled the air as Todd continued to bask in the center of attention, his charm working overtime. I could feel the frustration simmering beneath my skin, but I held it in. I wasn't about to make a scene, not yet. I watched him for a moment longer, knowing that I had to do this right. The way he moved through the crowd, the way his every word seemed to hang in the air like it mattered more than anyone else's. I turned and made my way over to Claire. She was still engaged in conversation with Todd's business partner, a woman who hung on every word Todd said. I waited for the right moment, then casually inserted myself into the conversation. "Hey Claire," I said, keeping my tone light. "I don't know if I told you, but I just secured a major acquisition for the company. It's going to be a game changer for us, a huge step forward." I watched her carefully, waiting for any sign of recognition, but she didn't react the way I thought she would. There was a slight pause in her conversation, almost imperceptible, but it was enough for me to catch. She didn't really hear me, not the way she would have if Todd had said it. She just nodded, her attention drifting back to the business partner. It stung, sharper than I'd expected. I wasn't asking for a standing ovation, but it was like I had spoken into a vacuum. And then it hit me. She had been swept up in Todd's narrative. She was so caught up in his world, she hadn't even bothered to hear about mine. I wanted to say more, to make her see, but I didn't. I simply smiled, polite and hollow, and excused myself from the conversation. I wasn't about to beg for her attention. I wasn't going to fight for a place at the table anymore. As I walked away, I watched the conversation continue, the words flowing smoothly from Todd's mouth, while I stood on the sidelines, just another face in the crowd. But something inside me shifted, the frustration, the simmering anger. It didn't feel like weakness anymore. It felt like clarity. This wasn't just about Claire or Todd. It was about something bigger, something I'd been ignoring for far too long. My life wasn't just about fixing things. I had built something of my own, something that could change everything. I wasn't going to keep being the invisible one. I stepped out of the conversation, letting the noise of the party blur in the background, my mind already shifting into the next phase. The plan I was quietly starting to piece together. It wasn't going to happen tonight, not with this crowd, not with Todd holding court. But once I got back to my office, that's where things would change. I was done with being the guy who never spoke up. I was done being the dependable one who never got noticed. This was my time now, and I was going to make them see it. Just then, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out and saw the notification, my lawyer's name flashing on the screen. I answered, trying to keep my voice even. "Ryan, it's done. The deal's closing, big returns. It's going to be a game changer." My stomach tightened as the words settled in. It was real. The deal I'd quietly worked on, the one Todd had been so eager to steal credit for, was finally closing. I looked around the room, imagining how this would change everything. The truth was about to come to light. Todd's lies were about to catch up with him, and I wouldn't be the only one to see it. Not anymore. The game had changed, and I wasn't playing by anyone's rules but my own. I walked to the patio, my steps calm and deliberate, though inside, my heart was pounding. Todd was still holding court with the crowd, his laughter louder than anyone else's. He had no idea what was coming. I could hear snippets of his voice, hear him spinning his version of events, making himself out to be the genius behind everything. The file was heavy in my hand, a small stack of documents that held everything I needed to expose him. I had it all: emails, contracts, timelines, proof of my work on the deal, and proof of his lies. It was time to set the record straight. I reached the table where Todd was sitting, surrounded by the usual admirers, and calmly slid the file onto the surface. The noise around us seemed to hush the second the file hit the table. It was like the air in the room thickened, and for a moment, it felt like everything froze. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just looked at Todd, making sure he saw the calmness in my eyes. Then, in a voice that only he could hear, I said, "You might want to look at this." Todd's eyes flickered to the file, and for the first time, I saw his confident facade crack. His hand shook slightly as he reached for it, pulling the stack of papers closer to him. As he flipped through the pages, his face paled. I could see him processing the documents, his mouth opening and closing, as if trying to find the right words. But there were no words, not for this. The crowd watched in stunned silence, no longer laughing, no longer hanging on his every word. They were all seeing it now, seeing the truth. The lies that Todd had spun for years were coming undone, and I wasn't going to let him wriggle out of this one. Todd finally looked up, his face flushed, but he couldn't muster anything coherent. Ryan, this isn't what you think." I cut him off with a quiet, controlled voice. "It's exactly what you think. The deal you've been bragging about, that was mine. I was the one who pulled it off. I made the calls, I did the work, and you took the credit. You've been doing it for years, taking credit for things I've built, things I've made happen. You've manipulated everyone here into thinking you're the one behind it all." Todd opened his mouth, probably trying to spin another excuse, but I wasn't interested in his excuses anymore, not tonight. "I'm not asking for applause," I continued, my voice steady, but sharper now. "I'm not asking for any kind of recognition, but the truth is the truth, and I'm done being invisible. From now on, you'll see me for who I really am." There was a long pause after my words, the kind of silence that pressed down on you like the weight of 1,000 unspoken things. The crowd stood still, no one moving, no one speaking. Todd's face had gone white, his smirk completely gone. He wasn't the center of attention anymore, not in the way he was used to. The golden boy had been dethroned. I took a step back, not wanting to be in the spotlight any longer. I had made my point. The truth was out there now, and Todd had nowhere to hide. The murmurs began to rise around the crowd as people started to process what had just happened. I could feel the tension, the shift, and I knew it wasn't just about Todd's lies anymore. It was about the power of finally being seen. Todd sat there, silent, trying to gather himself. But I wasn't looking for a fight. I wasn't looking to tear him down. This wasn't about revenge. This was about taking back control. I took a deep breath and walked away, not looking back. I had nothing more to prove to anyone, not anymore. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I heard bits and pieces of the aftermath, people talking about what had just happened, whispering in hushed tones. But I stayed out of it. I didn't need to be the center of attention. I had already made my mark. As for Todd, his reputation, the one he'd carefully built on lies, began to crumble. I could see the cracks. His charm wasn't enough to cover it up anymore. People started to ask questions, started to look at him differently. It wasn't just in the family anymore. It was out there for anyone to see. I didn't know how it would all play out, but I knew this. Todd's golden boy status was done, and I was done being invisible. In the days after the party, things shifted. The fallout from my little revelation spread faster than I expected, like wildfire. Todd's lies unraveled quickly, and with them, his carefully crafted image. People started talking, pointing out inconsistencies in his past claims. His credibility took a massive hit. I didn't have to lift a finger beyond that one moment. He did the rest himself, making excuses, trying to backpedal, but it was too late. Meanwhile, my own business dealings, ones I'd quietly orchestrated, finally started to get noticed. People who'd never given me the time of day were now reaching out, asking about future projects, offering partnerships. It felt strange at first, getting attention for something I'd always kept to myself, but it also felt right. Claire was shocked when she realized the scale of my success. I could see it in her eyes when we talked about the deal that had closed. She'd never really understood what I did, never really saw it until the truth was out there. It was like she'd been living in Todd's shadow, too. She wasn't the only one, though. The whole family seemed stunned when they realized how much I had accomplished without anyone noticing. But honestly, I didn't care about the accolades. I didn't need them, not anymore. I wasn't doing this for them, or anyone else. I was doing it for myself. I didn't need their validation. I'd built something real, something of my own. And for the first time in a long time, I was starting to see it. Not just the business, but me, who I was and what I could do. At the next family event, I walked in with my head held high. I didn't seek attention, but I didn't shy away from it either. I'd always been the guy who blended into the background, the one who quietly worked without asking for recognition. But now I wasn't hiding anymore. People noticed. The dynamic in the family had shifted. Todd wasn't the golden boy anymore. People saw him for what he was, and suddenly, I wasn't the invisible one. But I wasn't interested in stepping into the spotlight just because it was finally mine to take. I'd found peace in who I was, in what I'd built. I didn't need to prove myself anymore. As I stood there, listening to the conversation swirl around me, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. I didn't need their approval. I had created something far bigger than they ever expected, bigger than they'd ever known, and I didn't need them to validate it. I didn't need to be in the spotlight. I didn't need to be the center of attention. But I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. That was the difference, and I was finally okay with it.